Okay, start with the homage to Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Oh, somebody got cold today. Is it my imagination, or is it really? I think if we had rainy weather, it would be snowing. No. Okay, now, last week we studied the sutta in which Māra appears, and we discussed a little bit about the nature of Māra and the question whether Māra, the tempter or the evil one in Buddhism, is just a symbol for the defilements or for ignorance and craving, or whether Māra is a kind of real deity, the real being. I mean, I can't give a definite answer to that, but this sutta that we're going to study today shows Māra functioning as a real being, not just as a symbol for somebody's mental defilements. And so this sutta will take the form of a kind of contest or a discussion between one of the Buddha's chief disciples, Mahā Moggallāna, and Māra himself. Okay, so we could turn to the text, and we see that the sutta begins. It doesn't really feature the Buddha, but it features Mahā Moggallāna, who is the Buddha's chief disciple in the exercise of supernormal powers or psychic powers. So Moggallāna had the ability to, multiply his body so that instead of seeing one body, you could see 10 bodies, 20 bodies. He could be in different places at the same time. He could fly through the sky without having to book a plane ticket. He could sink in water, sink into, everybody sinks in water. He could walk on water, sink into the earth. Okay, so when this sutta opens, Mahā Moggallāna is living out, it seems, by himself, and he's out in the open, walking back and forth. And then on this occasion, it's a little strange sutta, but as we study this, we're going to try to see whether we can find, there has to be some message that's being conveyed by the sutta. It's not just purely for entertainment. So sometimes the suttas have a dash of humor, a dash of drama in them. So we'll try to find out what is the message being conveyed by the sutta. But as the sutta opens, Māra, of all places, he goes into Mahā Moggallāna's belly, and then from the belly or stomach, he goes into the bowels. And so, as Moggallāna is walking back and forth, suddenly he feels his belly get so heavy. And then he wonders, why has my belly suddenly gotten so heavy? It seems like I've just eaten a whole bunch of beans. So he must have been feeling too uncomfortable, too much like a bellyache even to continue walking. And so he goes into his dwelling place, and then he sits down, and then he starts investigating himself, probably using like the divine eye to look into his body to find out, why did this feeling of heaviness suddenly come upon me? You know, he probably ate just an ordinary meal. He was walking back and forth for exercise. So any food that he had eaten would have gotten well digested. So he was wondering, why suddenly my belly has just gotten so heavy? And then as he investigates his body, he sees that Māra is inside his bowels. So what is he going to do? So he addresses Māra. Now Moggallāna at this point is an arahat. That means he's completely liberated from all defilements. And so this could not be Māra just as a symbol for defilements in the mind. But here Māra is functioning as an independent living being who has his sort of malevolent purposes. He wants to create trouble for a disciple of the Buddha, even one who's fully liberated. And so Moggallāna says to him, "Come out, evil one, come out, evil one. Don't harass, don't trouble the Tathagata," that's the Buddha, "and don't trouble a disciple of the Tathagata, or it will lead to your harm and suffering for a long time." Okay, now Māra is probably swollen with pride. And so when Moggallāna says this, Māra thinks, he doesn't really know me, he doesn't really see me. How could he know me so quickly? How could he know that I'm there? You know, even the Buddha himself couldn't discern me so quickly. But now Moggallāna replies to Māra. He says, "Even thus I know you, evil one. Do not think he does not know me." Then he calls his number. He says, "You are Māra, the evil one." He tells him what Māra was thinking. And so then Māra realizes that he's been found out. So he thinks, this monk knows me. And so he comes out. He must go up through, from the bowels to the belly, from the belly up through the food tract, and then out the mouth. And then he stands up against the door, against the latch of the door. Maybe he's trying to hide there in some way. But then Moggallāna sees him standing there and says, "I see you there, too, evil one. Do not think he does not see me. You are standing against the door bar, evil one." Okay, now Moggallāna is going to relate a story to Māra. He tells him, he said, "Once upon a time, I was a Māra named Dusi." The word Dusi means something like the corrupter, the defiler. And I had a sister named Kali, and you were her son, so you were my nephew. Okay, to understand what's going on here, first we have to realize, as I explained last week, that Māra, though he's a real person, but Māra is actually something of a position rather than a fixed individual. To use the same analogy that I used last week, it's a little bit like the King of England. You know, so there's always a king or queen of England, but when one king dies, he passes away, and then another person gets appointed king. And he replaces, he be the heir to the throne, he becomes the King of England. And so the King of England, it's a kind of permanent position, at least in English, British government, British, what do you call this, the British sovereignty? But it's not always the same person that's occupying that position, but it's just one person at a time. And similarly, Māra is a position, not appointed, not elected, but different beings get to be Māra because of their karma. If they have those karmic, I think one would have to have a desire or aspiration to become Māra. So I don't know why anybody would have that aspiration. But through a certain type of karma, one gets to be Māra. Yeah.
Well, Kali, of course, is Durga, like goddess, Hindu goddess.
Yeah.
Most powerful because she destroys any evil. So it may be an attack on Hinduism, is saying that when he was in that incarnation, he was a Hindu and he had asked for, guidance. So it's.
Actually, that's an interesting point, except that I'm not sure at what point Kali became a prominent deity in Hinduism. Perhaps she developed out of a folk deity.
Upper caste Hinduism is quite different from Shudra Hinduism.
Yeah.
And Shudras sometimes say that they're not even Hindu because they have a different set of deity. But it's actually, the Shudra Hinduism is the majority religion. The Brahminical is about 10% of the population. They just have all the money.
That what?
They have all the money and all the press releases.
Yeah.
So they make the official propaganda.
Yeah. Though I don't know in any Buddhist texts from the early period an acknowledgement of Kali as a deity. I just don't know. It's something I'm not sure about. One would have to look into the history of the evolution of the Hindu deities, see whether Kali was a deity at that time. Certainly the Buddhist texts make fun of Brahma, who was depicted as the chief deity of the Brahmins. But it's interesting that the person who became the chief disciple of the Buddha at some point in the distant past had been Māra, the evil one, the corrupter, the defiler. Any kind of message coming out from that?
Yeah, there's always hope.
Yeah, exactly. No matter how far down one falls, one could always get back up, even to a top position.
And since I was a Māra named.
Yeah.
So does that mean there might be other Māra at that time?
I think, the way I understand it, that Māra is the chief position, but Māra is always has an army. It's referred to as the army of Māra. So there could be a lot of little deities, minor deities that are under the control of the chief Māra. But I think the point here is that at that time Moggallāna was the chief Māra. And is there anything else that's interesting that one could draw out from this? reflecting particularly on Mahā Moggallāna, say compared to somebody like Sariputta or Ananda? Yep.
Well, Mahā Moggallāna was known for his great spiritual power, his idis. He had the magical powers.
Yeah.
Sariputta was known for his analytical wisdom.
Yeah.
Ananda was known for his great memory.
Yeah.
I also think he really exemplified compassion a lot too, but that's just my personal thing.
Wait, say it again?
I also think Ananda really, really exemplifies compassion and memory.
Yeah.
But he's not, they don't really bring that up in the suttas. But, Mahā Moggallāna is the big magical one. It just sort of makes, it just kind of makes sense to me that you have this sort of little, almost like a fairy tale, lesson in suttas.
Yeah.
Sariputta is very dry. I think it's just sort of, I don't think he would,
Thank you.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't seem to fit with the other disciples, just in my view.
Yeah. I think that this is the interesting point, was Māra is seen as exercising these supernormal powers, taking on different appearances in order to tempt and try to lead monks and nuns astray, being able to cause the earth to shake, being able to transform himself sometimes into a serpent, showing up demonical appearances, causing changes in the weather. And this seems to go quite naturally with the supernormal powers that Moggallāna exercised. Yeah, I just wanted to add, to continue this thought one step further. And if one reads the text, one sees that Moggallāna can sometimes be quite forceful in his character. Like there's an incident one time where the Buddha, it was the full moon night, and the Buddha was supposed to recite the Patimokkha, the code of monastic rules. But there is a corrupt monk in the assembly, and the Buddha doesn't specify who he is, but whenever Ananda asks the Buddha to recite the Patimokkha, the Buddha just remains silent several times till when the night comes to an end, the Buddha says to Ananda, the assembly is not pure. Then Moggallāna thinks to himself, who is the Buddha referring to in this assembly? And then he uses his supernormal power to look into the minds of the other monks. And then he sees one monk sitting there who is corrupt, defiled, not a real monk, though pretending to be one, and so on. And so Moggallāna goes up to him and says, the Buddha has seen you, friend, get out. 3 times Moggallāna says that, and the monk just remains sitting there, or this person disguised as a monk sitting there. Then Moggallāna thinks to himself, this is amazing. This guy is spoken to 3 times, but he doesn't leave. Then Moggallāna grabs him by the arm, pulls him out of the assembly hall, and closes and locks the door behind him. So one doesn't see Ananda doing something like that, or Sariputta doing something like that. But Moggallāna does that. Wait, Matt has a question.
This implies that Moggallāna has had past lives. I wonder if any of the other of his disciples in the text are referred to also
Having
previous lives of previous Buddhas, because he tells us that.
Interesting question. Of course, there are like the commentarial stories. I would have to think about that. It doesn't come immediately to mind. Except there are some texts like Jataka stories embedded within the suttas, within the Nikayas. I'm not sure if the Buddha identifies some of the characters as being his own disciples at that time. I'd have to do a little investigation. Maybe you know these things.
Isn't there? This is the commentaries. I mean, I remember there's stories about Ananda being a king and the Buddha advising him. It's something about drunkenness. Maybe is that the Jataka story?
Usually those are the Jataka stories.
Jataka.
Yeah, I'd have to start looking things up to find out whether there are any references to the past lives of the disciples in the suttas themselves.
There's one, and I think it's in the Samyutta Nikaya, and I forget if the Buddha is, I forget if it's Sariputta or Mahā Moggallāna, but they're going to a village.
Yeah.
And the village, I think it's Moggallāna, but I'm not sure, so I'll just use that name until you remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the villagers are like, oh my God, it's Mahā Moggallāna. They're nice to the Buddha, but they don't really care about him.
Yeah.
And one of the disciples, why are they making such a big deal about Mahā Moggallāna, not, the Tathagata? The Tathagata says, many lives ago, when so-and-so, I guess they were Brahmins or whatever, they were just regular people, they were going up this hill and there was a swarm of bees, and the Buddha would say, these bees, kill them, get rid of them, and Mahā Moggallāna, I feel sorry for them, I want to be enlightened and I will help them and teach them. And then the Buddha said, well, those bees, these are the villagers. And they remembered that he was kind and I wasn't. And that's why they're making a big deal out of him and they're just sort of polite to me. And I can't, I'm going to have to...
That sounds like a commentary type of story.
I'm pretty sure I read that in some Samyutta.
Anyway, I translated the Samyutta.
You translated that?
I don't remember anything
I
like
have to
that.
look that up, unless it was in the back of it. I can't remember in one of the footnotes.
I don't even remember putting that in the note. But you look it up and...
I'll have to look that up. I remember that story.
Okay, Richard has something to say.
Yeah, I just think that...
Maybe you take the microphone.
Yes, I think there's a kind of Christian version of what seems to be going on with Moggallāna, which is something to do with the prodigal son, and say with Faust. Goethe saves Faust at the end of Faust, and of course he's accumulated all these magical powers by contact with Mephistopheles, right? And Johnny Chrysostom, the preacher around 400 AD, was a murderer before he became a Christian. And this apparently made him an extremely dynamic preacher.
Yeah.
I think there's the same kind of... the point is, if you transmute evil, or right, sort of that power, then there are special holy powers.
Okay, I think we should go on then. Okay, so the person who's now Moggallāna at that time was the Māra, or a Māra, the Māra named Dusi, and his sister's named Kali, and Kali had a son, and who was a son? But the person who is now Māra, the evil one. But since Moggallāna was Māra, and he had the sister Kali, she must have been some kind of goddess. And so her son, who's now Māra, must have been maybe a little Māra, a minor Māra. Anyway. Okay, and this was the time during which the Buddha named Kakusanda was the Buddha, the reigning Buddha in the world. Kakusanda goes back, let me just see. Anyway, Kakusanda goes back a long, long way, even before Kassapa Buddha. Siti Bhagava, Vesabu, Kakusanda, Gonagamana, Kassapa, Gautama. So, there's Gautama, then going backwards there's Kassapa Buddha, then Konagamana Buddha, then Kakusanda. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 Buddhas ago. So he was the Buddha in the world, and then he had also a pair of chief disciples. One was named Vidura, which means something like responsibility or taking up the burden. And the other was named Sanjiva, which means living or life. And then each of these two disciples had their own specialization, just like Gautama Buddha's two chief disciples, Sariputta, the specialist in wisdom, analytical wisdom, and Moggallāna, the specialist in supernormal powers. So under this Buddha, the monk Vidura had the specialization of teaching the Dhamma, and Sanjiva his specialization, it seems, was deep meditation. And so there's a story about how he got the name Sanjiva. It seems to me that this has to be intended humorously. We might not share the ancient Indian sense of humor, but I think that this is their intention. Okay, this monk, Sanjiva, would go to the forest and he would very easily enter into this meditation called the cessation of perception and feeling. This is the meditative state in which all perception and all feeling completely stops. And it's said that when one is in the state of meditation, nothing could harm one. It's sort of like it creates almost like the magical shield around the body. Remember, was it the Colgate advertisement for the teeth? Of course, this goes back to the 1960s. I don't know whether they still use it. But when you brush with Colgate or was there a toothbrush called Palmolive? No, Palmolive was a soap. It must have been Colgate. You brush with Colgate and then it puts a protective shield around the teeth. So when you go into Nirodha Samapatti, the body gets a protective shield so that fire, weapons, floods can't harm the body. So this monk, Sanjiva, one time he had gone into the forest and he had entered into the cessation of perception and feeling. And so some cowherds and shepherds and so on, they saw him sitting there and his body was so still, no breathing, no sign of anything taking place. They probably tried calling him, shaking him, but he didn't come out, and so they concluded that he had passed away while sitting in meditation. And so they thought, we can't leave him sitting here, we have to cremate him. And so they pile up grass, wood, cow dung, put the body on top of it, and then they light a fire, and then they go away. Okay, when the night is over, the next morning, this monk Sanjiva emerges from the cessation of perception and feeling. He shakes off the ashes from his robes, and then he thinks, time to go on alms round. So he gets his alms bowl, and he goes into the village on alms round, and then all of the cowherds and shepherds and people see him wandering for alms, and they think, wow, he's come back to life. He had died when we cremated him yesterday, and now he's come back to life. And so they call him Sanjiva, the one who lives, the living one. Okay, now Māra, this is the Māra Dusi, wants to create trouble for the good monks under the Buddha Kakusanda. So Māra has to find some way to shake their minds, to shake their mental stability, because that's how Māra gets an opportunity to enter, to get control of a person's mind. Okay, so how does Māra do this? Māra is not going to go about it directly, but he's going to go about this using the lay people as a kind of channel or vehicle. And so the text says that Māra thinks to himself, let me now take possession of the Brahmin tempt them or lure them into abusing and reviling the good monks. So, getting control of their mind, he plants in their mind the impulse, the thought. When you see these good monks coming on alms round, when they come into the village to collect alms, then you should abuse them, revile them, scold them, and make trouble for them. And then it's possible that when they are being abused, reviled, scolded, and harassed, then their minds will change. Their minds will get upset or angry. And in that way, I'll find the opportunity to get control of them. If they give rise, the monks give rise to thoughts of anger, then Māra could enter and sort of make them get more and more angry, and so that they lose all of the calm, tranquility, loving kindness, gentleness that they've been developing over the years. Okay, so Māra, the Maradusi, does this, and then when the monks come into the village, either for their alms round or to give Dharma teachings to the people, then the householders, especially the Brahmin householders, start insulting them. They say, "You are these bald-headed ascetics. You are the swarthy, that means dark, menial offspring of the kinsman feet." Maybe this needs a little explanation. What's called the kinsman here, with the capital K, is Brahma. And it was the belief of the Brahmins that the different social classes of Indian society had arisen from different parts of Brahma's body. They believed that the Brahmins themselves came from Brahman's head, especially from Brahman's mouth, that through his own direct command, Brahma created the Brahmins. Then it's from Brahma's arms and chest that he created the Kshatriyas. The Kshatriyas are the warriors, the administrators, the rulers, the kings and aristocrats. And so the kings and aristocrats perform the function of ruling over the country. They exercise political power, and that's seen as the function of for the body. It takes strong arms and a strong chest for a person to be able to do things effectively with the body. Then the Brahmins believed that the Vaishyas sprung from Brahma's thighs. The Vaishyas were the landowners, or the cultivators, the ones who cultivated the land, who owned the land, many of the parcels of land, who raised the cattle, who worked as merchants. And so they were like the pillars, we call them the mercantile class, the class that kept society rolling, the wheels of the social and economic order rolling. So those were like the thighs which hold up the trunk of the body. And then the Shudras were the menial workers, the laborers, the servants, the people who worked the fields. And so that was considered the lowest social class within the class system. And so they were the feet. They came from Brahma's feet. Now those who become ascetics or samanas or bhikkhus in the Indian system, they step outside the class system. So really they don't belong to any of the social classes. But the Brahmins look down at the samanas, the ascetics, the renunciants. And so what they're doing when they're insulting them, they're grouping the samanas together with the sudras, with the manual workers, the menial workers. They're saying, you spring from Brahma's feet. And so they call them baldies because they would shave their heads. I used to get this too, and not anymore, but back sometimes in the 1970s when I was back in the U.S., when walking through the streets, they would call out, "Why don't you grow your hair? Baldy, bald head." Those days I was young. Nowadays they don't have any reason to say that to me. Okay, and then they go on to ridicule them, and they say, you say, we are meditators, then with shoulders drooping, with head down and all limp. Then the Pali uses a sequence of words which are based on the basic form is jayati, which means to meditate. But the Pali adds a number of prefixes. So I tried to capture this in the translation. How does it go? Okay, you claim you're meditators and you meditate, you pre-meditate, you out-meditate, you mis-meditate. And then they go on to say, just as an owl waiting for a mouse meditates, pre-meditates, out-meditates, and mis-meditates, just as a jackal waiting for the fish meditates, and so on, just as a cat waiting for a mouse meditates, pre-meditates, out-meditates, mis-meditates, just as a donkey loaded with a donkey unladen standing by a doorpost or a train meditates, pre-meditates, out-meditates, and mis-meditates, so these bald-headed recluses, these swarthy menial offspring of the kinsman feet, claim we are meditators, and with shoulders drooping, heads down, and all limp, they meditate, pre-meditate, out-meditate, and mis-meditate. Okay, then, on that occasion, most of those human beings, when they died, on the dissolution of the body after death, they were reborn in a state of misery, in an unhappy destination, in the lower world, even some in the hell realms. Okay, any kind of agenda underlying this passage? Can we see any kind of agenda here?
Looks like even when those Brahmins, they're controlled by Māra in performing those unwholesome activities.
Yeah.
But they themselves still bear the results, and they get unfortunate rebirth.
Yeah, this is an important point. This isn't quite what I had in mind when I was speaking about the agenda, but this is what is explained by the commentaries. At first glance, when we look at this, it seems unfair that if Māra takes possession of them and controls them, then it's Māra's responsibility, not theirs. They are just being controlled by Māra like puppets. So, in that case, the people themselves, the human beings, shouldn't bear the karmic responsibility. So what the commentary says is that even though Māra entered them, sort of entered their minds, but Māra wasn't controlling them, but Māra was just giving sort of suggestions to them, telling them, sort of like in the form of temptations, tempting them to act like that. But he was not manipulating them so that they were like a person in a trance who's been told by a hypnotist, you should go up to the third stranger who comes walking down the street and slap him in the face. In that case, if the person does that, we have to say the person isn't responsible for hurting another, it's the hypnotist who tells them that. But this maybe is more analogous to maybe a demagogue who's inciting a crowd, maybe during the South in the early 1960s, saying, go to the houses of the black people and burn their houses down. So the demagogue plants the idea in the minds of the people who get aroused and excited and go and do that. But it's their responsibility. But that wasn't quite the point that I had in mind.
Well, basically what it says is, don't do anything bad against bhikkhus or the Tathagata, or something bad will happen to you.
Yeah, that's one point. But something more specific I had in mind. I thought, Richard, you would have some idea.
Well, you're saying that the Hindu order is going to lead you to a bad rebirth, particularly if you resent Buddhists.
If you what?
If you resent Buddhists, that is, if you treat Buddhist monks badly because they are not Hindu and you are, then you would go to a lower realm.
Yeah, this is pretty close to what I had in mind. But to put it a little more exactly.
Well, I don't know if this speaks to it, but it's also really rebuking in the caste system, the Brahmana caste system.
I don't know if this speaks to what you had in mind either, but it's really speaking against the prejudice of the caste system.
It is speaking against the prejudice of the caste system, but okay, let me give you a hint to what I had in mind. Don't forget that this is depicted as having taken place during the reign or the time of an earlier Buddha, the Buddha Kakusanda. So what is the agenda, the underlying agenda here? Okay, I'll say, I think Richard was quite close. That even though this is depicted as having taken place, way back, maybe hundreds of aeons in the past, but this was probably just reflecting everyday experience of the monks during the Buddha Gautama's own time. So this would be a problem that the monks could have met in their day-to-day life. When going through Brahmin villages, the Brahmins would insult them in that way. Not only the monks, the Buddha himself was sometimes harassed and insulted by Brahmins in that way. Did you?
This sort of thing is quite real now.
Yeah.
When I first went to India, I find that kind of conflict, say, between the Christians and Hindus. The poor, impoverished Christians will come up to me and say, but we live in the land of the snake people, like the Nagas, the Naga type, right? They say, that is, all these people are vicious to us and they're vile and evil. And so on. So those kinds of caste conflicts and caste and religious conflicts are all over the place.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on. Okay, apparently the monks must have come and reported to the Buddha Kakusanda what was happening to them. And so the Buddha Kakusanda instructs the monks. He says, monks, this is Māra Dusi, who has taken possession of the Brahmin householders and They're acting on his instructions. So now the Buddha gives them some advice. He says, "Come, monks, dwell pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise, the second, the third, the fourth, above, below, around, and everywhere. And so pervade the whole world with the mind of loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. And so pervade the whole world with a mind of compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity." Okay, so the monks get this advice from the Buddha, then they go to the forest or to a quiet place, and they practice these meditations. These are the 4 immeasurable states, or the 4 Brahma Vihara, the 4 divine abodes. Okay, so what kind of, maybe we could see a message coming through here. What would be the message?
Have faith, I suppose.
Wait, take the microphone.
I suppose the message would be just to have faith in your practice in Dharma and not worry about it.
Yeah, but it's not so much faith in the practice, but special kind of practice. What is the way to develop, to deal with this kind of antagonism from others? Aggression, hostility.
The only way to deal with antagonism is...
Wait, you take the microphone that's coming.
The only and most effective way of dealing with antagonism is with loving kindness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is the Buddha's constant instruction that if others insult you, revile you, abuse you, you shouldn't insult them in return, you shouldn't abuse them, you shouldn't revile them in return. But the way to sort of overcome them, or to say, in quote marks, conquer them, is by extending loving kindness and compassion towards them. And so if people are hostile, then the Buddha gives the instructions, respond to them with loving kindness. There's a sutta, it's actually the beginning, early part of the Brahmajala Sutta, the first sutta in the Dika Nikaya, where the Buddha tells the monks, if others should insult me, or insult the Dharma, or insult the Sangha, you shouldn't get upset, angry with them, and become hostile towards them. But you should go to them and you should say, for such and such reason, he says, you shouldn't get upset with them, angry with them, or become hostile towards them, because if you do so, that will just be for your own harm and suffering. But instead you should go to them and say to them, what you say is wrong, this is the reason why it's wrong, that's the reason why this is wrong, this is the reason why that is wrong, and so on. Okay, so the monks practice the 4 immeasurable states, and then when they next come through the village, next time they have to go to the village, when the Brahmins insult them and abuse them, then the monks just radiate loving kindness and compassion, and this will perhaps transform the minds of the Brahmins. Okay, so Māra, now he realizes that he's lost this round to the Buddha and the monks, so he wants to think of another strategy. So now I'm in paragraph 16. So now Māra thinks, in effect he says, I've lost out on this round, so let me now take possession of the Brahmin householders and tell them, come now, honor, respect, revere, and venerate the virtuous bhikkhus of good character, then perhaps when they are honored, respected, revered, and venerated by you, some change will come about in their minds, whereby the Māra may find an opportunity. Okay, so what is the agenda being, sort of the purpose of this passage here?
It's a warning against vanity.
Exactly. In fact, this is like, we go there, isn't it?
I was just going to say, give them enough rubber milk. She put it almost the same thing.
I was just going to say, she put it very well with vanity, but I was going to say, give the monks enough rope and they'll choke themselves with it. They'll step back.
Okay. Yeah, this is probably the bigger danger for the monks, not in the Brahminic society, but in the society of the faithful, the Buddhist devotees. Like one of the problems that is called labha sakara siloka, which means gain, honor, and fame or veneration. And so people come, the lay people who have faith in Buddhism, of course to bow down is a proper form of respect. But when people bow down, the monk can think, oh, they're doing that because I'm somebody special. So it must be my personal charisma which is inducing them to bow down to me. And then people will come, in Buddhist countries it's considered a way to acquire merit is to make offerings to monks. So people will come and honor them by giving them sometimes, basically the lay people should support the monks with their material needs, but sometimes they'll go to excess and overload them with material things. And again, the monks can become swollen with pride, conceit, and vanity. And then when that happens, then they become negligent and neglect, they become heedless and they neglect their practice, their training. Okay, so the monks must have come to the Buddha and reported that now that now the householders were honoring, respecting, and revering them. I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun. Okay, so Māra, the evil one, takes possession of the Brahmin householders' minds, and so the Brahmin householders honor, respect, revere, and venerate the monks. And so on that occasion, it said most of those human beings, when they died, were reborn on the dissolution of the body after death in a happy destination, even the heavenly world. Again, in this case, it seems Māra is not controlling the lay people, but he is inducing them to act in this way. But they choose to act in that way of their own free will. And so by doing this, then they do get merit because they're showing respect and reverence to the Sangha, one of the fields of merit, and making offerings, which it's all meritorious. But Māra's intention is a bad one, even though the lay people being induced by him might have a good intention. Okay, so now the monks must have come, reported to the Buddha what was happening, and then the Buddha gives some advice to the monks. So here, the Blessed One, I'm in paragraph 18, the Blessed One, Kakusanda, accomplished and fully enlightened, addressed the monks thus. He tells them that first that it's Māra that has taken possession of the Brahmin householders and is inducing them to behave in that way. So Māra has the bad intention. And now he tells the monks, come monks, abide contemplating foulness in the body, we could say the unattractive nature of the body, perceiving repulsiveness in nutriment, perceiving disenchantment with all the world, and contemplating impermanence, the impermanence of all formations, of all conditioned things. So you see, when one gets honor, respect, veneration, then the mind swells up with vanity. And then this leads to a kind of attachment to these worldly gains, these worldly acquisitions. And then one starts clinging to them, and one loses sight of the need for liberation. And so these four meditations are intended to create within the mind what we call a quality of samvega. Yeah, samvega, it's difficult to get a really exact translation of this word. But sometimes we render it as a sense of urgency. It's a kind of agitation that descends. But it's not the agitation of the ordinary restless mind, but it's an agitation that comes when one realizes the unsatisfactory nature of existence, of ordinary existence, or that sense of truth that breaks through the complacency of our ordinary day-to-day life. Or it's the kind of agitation that arises when truth breaks through the complacency with which we lead our ordinary lives. But I think it was Thoreau who spoke about lives of quiet desperation. So when that gets shaken, that is samvega. And then the other quality these meditations generate is nibbida, which means disenchantment, seeing through into the reality of life, and then losing the fascination with worldly pleasures and enjoyments and objects of attachment. So here the text mentions 4 meditations that have this effect. One is the contemplation of I think better is the unattractive nature of the body. So when one sees the nature of the body as being made up of different organs and tissues, hairs usually the text enumerate 31 or 32 parts, heads of the hair, body hair, fingernails, teeth, skin, the muscles, nerves, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, the liver, the diaphragm, the spleen, the lungs, stomach, stomach, bowels, the small intestines, the large intestines, the different fluids. Then one loses the attachment to the body. Then perceiving repulsiveness and nutriment. You see, when the lay people honor the monks, one of the things they do is to prepare very tasty, delicious foods. And so if the monk is not mindful, he could become sort of intoxicated with the taste of the food. And so to overcome that intoxication, what one does is to contemplate the actual process of eating, taking up the food, putting it into the mouth, chewing it, of the saliva mixing with the food, swallowing it, the food going into the stomach, the food getting digested in the stomach, passing into the small intestine, the large intestine, turning into waste, coming out as waste. And so that kind of reflection will bring the perception of the repulsive nature of food and the eating process. Then perceiving disenchantment or discontent with all the world is seeing, reflecting on all of the different troubles and dangers and miseries in worldly existence, old age, sickness, death. And then contemplating impermanence of all conditioned things, that everything that arises is conditioned by other factors, and so it's all impermanent. And since everything is changing, there's no use clinging to anything. So today I'm praised, maybe tomorrow I'm blamed. Tomorrow I'm blamed, next day I'm praised. Today I have honored, tomorrow dishonored. Today I'm healthy, tomorrow I'm sick. Next I'm sick for a few days, a few weeks, then I get healthy, then I get sick again. So everything is impermanent, can't rely on anything. And so when one does these practices, these meditations, then all the honor, respect, veneration, of course one can appreciate when others show that it indicates that there's respect and honor in their minds, but it doesn't swell up one's own mind. Okay, so when the monks get this advice from the Buddha, then they practice in this way. And apparently, probably in this way, as they go on their alms round or into the village and get respect from the people, then they're able to maintain equanimity. Okay, now there's a kind of shift of scenario, and this particular incident is discussed here, or narrated. This begins in paragraph 20. Okay, on one occasion, the Buddha Kakusanda goes into the village for alms together with his chief monk Vidura as his assistant. Then the Māra this is the former Mahā Moggallāna, takes possession of a certain boy, has the boy pick up a stone and throw the stone at the venerable Vidura on the head, so that it cuts the head even to the point that blood comes flowing out from the head. Okay, then the Buddha Kakusanda turns around and looks at him with the elephant look. What is the elephant look? Why does the text use that expression, the elephant look? Anybody have? Has anybody seen an elephant look at something behind him? What does the elephant do? We see elephants every day, right?
Doesn't he have to turn his whole body?
Yeah, exactly. The elephant turns the whole body around. So this is said what the Buddha does. The Buddha, when he wants to look at something behind him, sort of part of his Buddha dignity, that he doesn't turn the head around like this, or turn part of the body like this, but sort of like with a regal his regal demeanor is such that when he wants to see something behind him, he turns the whole body around. So the Buddha turns around, looks behind him, and he thinks to himself, this Maradusi knows no bounds. He's just gone beyond the limits completely. And with that look, the Maradusi fell from that place, from his status, and was reborn in the great hell. Now the commentary has to come in here and give an explanation. Why does the commentary give an explanation?
Otherwise the Buddha had killed somebody.
Yeah, otherwise you think that the Buddha has not only killed somebody, but he's consigned somebody, even a Māra, to hell. But the commentary explains that the Buddha didn't really kill him or cause him to fall into hell, but the Buddha knew that because of that evil deed, Māra was going to pass away and fall into hell. But the Buddha just turned around in order to say to him, you know no bounds. Okay, then the text goes on and says, now Moggallāna goes on to explain, he's speaking to the contemporary Māra, he's saying there are three names for the great hell: the hell of the 6 bases for contact, the hell of the impalement with stakes, and the hell to be felt for oneself. Okay, then the wardens of hell came up to me, this is Moggallāna, and said, good sir, when stake meets stake in your heart, then you will know I have been roasting in hell for 1,000 years. Then Moggallāna says, for many a year, many a century, many a millennium, I roasted in that great hell, and for 10 millennia, I roasted in the auxiliary of that great hell. That's like the vestibule of that great hell, experiencing the feeling called that of emerging from ripening. My body had the same form as a human body, but my head had the form of a fish's head. Now, isn't this quite incredible that a being not only who was Māra, but who was in hell for thousands and thousands of years should later become the chief disciple of the Buddha? So if we feel some difficulty when we're trying to do our meditation practice and think, oh, I don't stand the chance of making any progress, too difficult, I just don't have it together. One could just think of Moggallāna, who was in hell for thousands of years and yet became a chief disciple. And not only did Moggallāna do this in an earlier life, does anybody else know what Moggallāna did in an earlier life? Maybe still earlier than that one. Andrea certainly knows.
No, I don't.
You don't?
I'm thinking.
Excuse me?
I'm thinking.
Don't you know this?
Is he the one who killed people because his...
No, that was Angulimala, who was contemporary with the Buddha Gautama. But long ago, Moggallāna had actually killed his own parents. This is considered, actually the 2 deeds are considered 2 of the 5 terrible crimes, or terrible karmas. Killing one's parents, killing an arahant, causing the Buddha to bleed with a mind of malice, and maliciously breaking up, causing a schism in a harmonious sangha. Okay, so then Moggallāna continues by reciting verses which are instructions to the contemporary Māra, the Māra that attacked him, telling Māra about all of the suffering that he himself had gone through when he was the Māra Dusi. And then he warns him, in effect, not to attack a disciple of the Buddha. You can read the verses on your own. I don't have to take the verses. There are notes that explain some of the references in the verses. Okay, at this point I'll take any questions that have come up based on the sutta. Okay, Richard?
Yeah, what is the hell to be felt for oneself? What does that mean?
I think the sense is simply that one has to experience that oneself. I mean, that's true of any feeling.
So, these are the three names for the great hell.
Yeah.
And the great hell has these three characteristics. One is the six bases, it's the hell of the six bases for contact.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a sensory, the six
Yeah.
bases are this. So it's a sensory hell. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Secondly, it's one of the impalement, the stakes.
Yeah.
And second, the hell to be felt for oneself. So those are the three names of it.
Yeah.
It's the same experience. Is that right?
Yeah. It seems that there's just three different aspects to that experience. It's actually the same thing.
Well, just what is, I don't quite understand the name of the hell to be felt for oneself.
I don't either. The only sense that I can make out of it is that one has to experience it oneself. But of course, any feeling is like that. I don't know, maybe it just emphasizes that it's something to be personally felt.
Cannot be expressed by words.
I think that would be stated differently. I'm not sure. But one thing I should say, that this is the same as the hell that's usually called avicii, at least according to the commentary.
There's another hell besides avicii, isn't there?
Oh, there are actually large numbers of hells. There's supposed to be 16 hot hells, 16 cold hells. But avicii is supposed to be the worst of them.
There used to be a punishment. There were once 360 forms of the death sentence in England, right? And one of them was impalement. That was when the judges would sit in a restaurant and throw oyster shells at you as you were stuck on a pole in the Thames as the tide came in, and you'd be drowned. But they would stick you on a wooden pole, like so you would. Right, that was impalement.
It was going through the body?
That's right. Right, and apparently they had some way of doing it so it didn't kill you. You ended up drowning while you were stuck there. So the relationship between these three names fascinates me. Because the first one is the saying it's the six bases of contact, which implies it's wholly sensory. And the second one, it's impalement, so it's internal sense too. Body sense. I mean, this is about as agonizing as you can get. Right? And then the third one says, I think is it saying it's the one to be felt for oneself because there is no other, there's nothing abstract about it. There is no way to comprehend it other than as a totally involving sensory experience that is the six bases, including internal.
I guess one could maybe take it that way,
It's like there's just no way to grasp it without being there.
Yeah, okay, let's...
I'm struck by something that was said at the beginning today when you contrasted this disciple of the Buddha with Sariputra, who's known as having this brilliant mind.
Yeah.
He's cultivated his mind
Yeah.
very much and his reasoning skills. And Ananda, who's popularly known as being very pure-hearted and very compassionate, he seems to be pointing towards a third kind of wisdom, or a third way of wisdom, which is like emerging from this experience. It's interesting to me that he's suggesting that transforming this tendency to evil is another and a very deep way to arrive at wisdom. I don't know how to frame it as a question, but it's really striking today that there's something besides the kind of monastic skills of reasoning and cultivation of compassion, but a wisdom from life, or transforming, or breaking away from.
But what seems to be transformed is really that, maybe you could call it almost like a violent tendency, or a transgressive tendency, transforming it. I don't see it so much as the wisdom, but more psychic powers that can be used in a wholesome way for let's say, the defense of the faith, but not without causing harm for others, not like the Crusades or the...
It can also be a way of showing in any tradition where you're dealing with psychic powers.
Yeah.
Psychic powers can be very dodgy. You can get into a lot of trouble with them. You can attract a lot of unwholesome entities by them.
Yeah.
And look who was attracted. Māra was attracted to Mahā Moggallāna.
Yeah.
I know Māra bothered other people too. He liked to tweak the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis in general.
He liked to what?
He liked to tweak the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis in general.
Yeah.
He definitely liked to do that. But I think he might have been particularly attracted to Mahā Moggallāna.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily in many traditions, even if whether it's Buddhism or whether you're looking at the yogic tradition, or looking at the Taoist tradition, they will really warn you if you happen to find that you're getting psychic powers, try to ignore them because you can get into a lot of trouble with that.
Yeah.
So this could also be a warning. Be careful.
Yeah, I've actually haven't seen this point made so explicitly in the Buddhist texts. That one shouldn't be attracted to psychic powers because they could get you into trouble. It's just, except from Buddhist teachers say that, but I haven't seen that coming from the Buddha. Maybe because it's always that the psychic powers are usually presented within the framework where they build up, where the different attainments build up, culminating in arahantship.
Right, but remember, what's his face, the Buddha's cousin who tried to kill him?
Actually, I have to resolve that. Yeah, that is...
I'm not saying it's necessarily affirmatively stated, but I think one can glean that from the teachings. It's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah. And also, at least within the framework of the story, there's certainly... Māra would have been attracted to Moggallāna because there was a karmic connection with them. A karmic connection between them from the previous life, that the present Māra had been the cousin of Moggallāna when he was Māra himself. But also in Hinduism, I could see almost a parallel to the case of Moggallāna with the figure of Shiva, who is, on the one hand, he's like the very deep meditator. You see the images of him always with the Himalaya mountains. He's up in the Himalayas, on a cliff in the Himalayas, with the large Himalayas in the background. He's in deep samadhi, and the snake is curled around him. He has the blue body. And then also he becomes the fierce deity of Hinduism, the destroyer of the world. Isn't that the case? So the samadhi power and that destructive power seem to go together. Whereas Vishnu is a little bit, maybe we could say Vishnu a little bit is analogous to Sariputta, sort of gentle and loving. And Shiva as being analogous to Mahā Moggallāna, with deep samadhi powers, but also can be strong and fixed and determinate in his action.
Wouldn't the current Māra know that fact his chain to this new student project is really solid, that he could be that tempted. Being aware that Māra had entered his body.
Apparently, within the framework of the story, the current Māra hadn't known that Moggallāna had been his uncle, the Māra Dusi, in a past life, because Moggallāna has to tell him that. You know, I have to say very frankly, I don't know how much of this is actually historical fact and how much of this is a story intended to convey points of Dharma. So, you know, when they establish these relationships, I don't know whether they're really true or just sort of, okay, let's say, a fiction for the purposes of edification.
There's an English expression, it takes a thief to catch a thief. And at the beginning, Māra had said, how did you know that I was Māra? You know, even the Buddha wouldn't see me. And maybe this is an application of that psychological wisdom.
Yeah.
It takes a white wizard.
Yeah. Okay, I think we should end for the morning session, and then we can come back for some further discussion. Oh, there's a question. Let's see. One more question. Okay. Okay, as Māra took possession of beings in a physical sense, how do Buddhists see exorcism as compared to the Catholic Church? Let us say this is not the question that is settled to my knowledge in the texts themselves, but it's something that goes on in popular Buddhist culture. And in popular Buddhist culture, there are rites and rituals of exorcism. People sometimes get possessed by, or at least it's believed that they get possessed by spirits, bhutas or yakshas. And sometimes they're brought, it's not really the specialization of monks, but there are people, lay people who are specialists in exorcism, and they take on that role of reciting mystical formulas and performing rituals in order to exorcise the spirit. That's what I've observed in Sri Lanka. I can't say about the other Buddhist countries. Okay, question 2. Wealthy patrons who donate a lot of money to temples might be corrupting the monks. Isn't Māra actually taking possession of these monks rather than the donors? It's an interesting point. It seems here that Māra isn't able to get access to the monks directly. I don't know why. But what he has to do, at least this is the framework of the story. So the way Māra is working is by getting control of the householders and getting them either to try to make the monks angry and upset by abusing them, or making the monks proud and haughty by honoring and respecting them. Okay, is nibbida sometimes translated disenchantment and sometimes as revulsion, as in paragraph 119? Actually, the word that is translated disenchantment here isn't nibbida, but this is another word, anabhirakta or anabhirakti, which could mean discontent. And I should also say that I translated the word nibbida in the Majjhima Nikaya as disenchantment. Then I was going to use it in the connected discourses, the translation of Samyutta Nikaya. But another monk who will remain nameless prevailed on me very strongly and said, arguing you should translate it as revulsion. And then he gave me some reasons, and at the last minute, just before it went to press, I accepted his arguments and translated revulsion. But afterwards I regretted that, and I would go back, and in fact I'm using disenchantment again. I don't actually like revulsion. Okay, we'll end with sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the Devas, the Buddhas, with all beings, and we could even share them, especially today, with Māra. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chiram rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata Deva Naga Mahidika Punyantam Anumoditva Chiram Rakantu Mam Param Etavatacha Mehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacha Mehi Sampadam Punya Sampadam Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavatacha Mehi Sampadam punya sampadam sabbe Māra anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya pavagupadaya vichihetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya samino dukha pamuchantu pusantu nibuddhi. Okay, we could stand. A short bow and 3 bows, 3 full bows, half bows. Oh, I'm sorry, 3 short bows.